Hello and welcome to the Driver Hire podcast. My name's Tony from Driver Hire Croydon and Sutton.
Hello, I'm Gary from Driver Hire in Colchester.
And we decided to get together to create a series of regular podcasts for people who want to know more about driver hire, but principally to provide hints, tips and tricks to help our drivers be the very best that they can be. Hi Gary, how you doing?
Very well, Tony. You're looking good.
Well, likewise. Stop flirting, Gary. Yes, likewise. It's been a little while. I've not seen you since before Christmas.
Yes, and my hair's grown so long. I'm sitting here looking at myself in this Zoom meeting, and I realise I need to go and see a barber. Unlike yourself.
Well, yes. Well, barber, yes, maybe for other reasons. Yes. Yes. So, I trust Santa looked after you.
Well, he was very kind. He bought me lots of good goodies for the household, such as Huey lights that have all gone around the TV and lovely cooking utensils or cooking things, all the things I needed.
Oh, yes, excellent. Good. Okay. Well, I mean, yes, it is our first catch up since New Year. So happy New Year, everybody listening as well. Although I guess we're probably nearer February than December at the moment. So what's the plan for today, Gary?
Well, we've got to talk about the new highway code changes.
Yeah. It's certainly current in the news. Now, I'm not entirely sure whether this is going to get published just after the rules have changed or just before. So if we go past tense or future tense in this conversation, apologies, but it's going to be about the same time as the rules change. The Highway Code's had a great big consultation from 2020 and some new rules come into effect this weekend.
Yeah, even if we're a little bit later, Tony, hopefully we'll have the more facts than some of the things I've been seeing out there and all the falsies I've been seeing, the fake news as someone else would put out there already. I just don't understand how these people get all these fake information.
Well, I have to say I've read some quite extraordinary things as well, getting ready for this. There's a lot of sensationalism and scaremongering. But in reality, I think what we have here is an evolution of the Highway Code. It's bringing it up to date, recognising the change in road use and making provision for it. And I think ultimately, one of the government's main aims is to promote active travel. So things we can do to make more vulnerable road users, like cyclists and pedestrians, feel safer, then surely that's got to be a good thing.
Oh, very much so. I mean, it's something we both champion through our podcasts and videos is helping the vulnerable road users. And we're both HGV drivers, we're both cyclists, though I don't look like one. And it is to improve safety. And it can't but help us all.
So in preparation for this, I had a look back at the history of the Highway Code, and it has changed many, many times over the years, or evolved is a better word than changed, because the basic principle of the Highway Code has always been the same. It's a common set of rules to keep everybody safe. But I found some interesting stuff. So apparently the first, sort of predating the first Highway Code, in 1920, there was a departmental committee on motor vehicle regulation, and they created a compulsory and uniform code of signals for all road vehicles.
Sorry, Tony, were you involved in helping writing that?
I'll just let that one just pass by. Hang on.
Okay.
So this evolved out of so what happened in London was that motorists, obviously there wasn't that many cars on the road in 1920, but what motorists had done was they just created their own way of kind of signalling to each other. And British cars, of course, had the steering wheel on the right-hand side because we were passing offside to offside. And so it's very easy to stick the right arm out the window to signal a right turn. And that waving up and down of the arm that's still in the Highway Code to indicate slowing down and stopping, that was just created amongst motorists trying to find a way to communicate with each other. But interestingly, in those regulations, they kind of formalized that. And it said that you could use your own arm or a dummy arm to signal with?
A dummy arm?
A dummy arm. Yeah. So I had to look at this twice. So the reason for the dummy arm was because you had some luxury cars that were enclosed, and not all cars were enclosed in those days, but luxury cars were. And so a dummy arm actually is one of these arms that pops up at the side of the car with an indicator on the end. Now, these are called trafficators. And I actually remember, and I, as a kid growing up in the 70s, not the 20s, thank you, Gary. As a kid growing up in the 70s, I actually remember there were very old cars even then that actually had these trafficators that would pop up to make the signal. Do you remember those?
I do. I remember the trafficators. And if you said trafficators on this, I don't know exactly what you meant, but dummy arms, no. I just thought of a dummy from like a mannequin or something.
Just so take a mannequin from a shop and just stick his arm out the window instead of yours.
Yes.
So yeah, and the other reason was that actually the motor industry, there wasn't that many manufacturers, and so there were cars brought in from other countries where the steering wheel would be on the left-hand side, and so you needed some kind of mechanism to be able to put something out the right-hand side of the car to indicate a right turn. So that's where that came from.
And technology's changed a little bit since 1920s.
Well, yes, absolutely. It has.
In fact, I had a Tesla last week, and things have definitely changed. There was a lack of buttons in a Tesla. I didn't like it, to be honest, because it makes your Doris look totally different.
So how do you operate a Tesla? Is it thought control or something?
Oh, yeah, you speak to it. You use windscreen wipers, and the windscreen wipers comes on. Wow. You touch the big screen and use it, but there is no actual stalk to put the windscreen wipers on, apart from press a button for the wipe. Right. But it's not the same. And I didn't quite get to grips with it. It wasn't the be all and end all for me, I must say.
Oh, so this was a test drive. This wasn't a purchase.
Yeah. I was lucky enough I was given it for a week. It was fun, and my wife loved it.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's got great technology. There's no getting away from it. And I sat for 3 hours outside a hospital waiting to pick a friend up, and Netflix on a great big 15-inch screen. Fantastic.
Fair enough.
And I didn't pay for that Netflix. It was all on there. So there's great technology. But we're sidetracking here, Tony.
We have, yeah. So anyway, the first actual highway code was introduced in 1931. And that was part of the 1930 Road Traffic Act. And it sold for 1 penny. So a massive investment back in 1931. But it's had various evolutions along the way. So just a summary of those. Of course, when the first highway code came out, there wasn't any motorways. So motorway driving was introduced to the highway code after the introduction of the first motorway. 1968, highway code included photographs for the first time, and the continental style road signs were taken into account in that 1968 edition. And those continental style road signs are the ISO standard that we know today, that we've talked about on previous podcasts. 1978 introduced the Green Cross Code. Do you remember the Green Cross Code, Gary?
Oh, yes, very, very much so. A big man. He believed he went on to play Darth Vader, but they didn't use his voice because he come from the Plymouth or the Southwest area. I can't remember his name whatsoever.
I think, answers on a postcard if I'm wrong, I think it may have been David Prowse.
Wait, how do you remember everything, Tony?
I don't know. But anyway, so I suppose the most modern evolution of the highway code, going back to the subject we're here for, was when it became an electronic app in 2012. So really, I mean, we're having a bit of fun with the history of it, yeah. but really, these changes that are coming out this weekend are really just the next step in the evolution of the highway code.
Yeah, and it's something, it needs changing and updating, because we've got cycle paths we see being put in place all the time. I mean, you walk into work I guess 4 or 5 times a week, don't you, Tony?
I do,
and
yeah.
you live in a very built-up area, and the rules have changed come Monday. You should be a safer person to walk in as well.
Hope so. And this is part of the government's active travel initiative. There's an investment of 338 million to boost cycling and walking. And the benefit of that is to help reduce congestion, certainly help with pollution, and help individual fitness as well. And an interesting stat that I found prepping for this episode, Gary, is that in 2020, the number of miles travelled by cyclists in this country has increased by 46%. And that is equivalent to the previous 20 years of increase combined. So clearly that's going to have something to do with COVID, because, we're in, that's the height of the pandemic. And maybe people who were on furlough maybe took more exercise. But I also wonder, and this is just me speculating now, is it more desirable to be on a push bike than it is in a bus, potentially, subjecting yourself to COVID?
Yeah, I mean, for example, is it better to travel a few miles by bike than it is go by train? I know someone who bought electric push bike and used that much better than go by train, because he finds that's much easier to do if he possibly can. He done it for health reasons as well. So You're right there, Tony, and it's just looking across the board to help each other to get fitter as well.
Yeah, and I suppose, if you are going to be somebody sat there stuck in a traffic jam trying to get to work in the morning, you need to look out the window and see that cycling or walking looks enjoyable for you to want to make that change. So part of that 338 million, it's not just about changing the highway code. It's about introduction of cycle lanes. It's introduction of safe parking for your bike at railway stations, all that kind of thing. It's a whole raft of things to try and encourage this active travel.
Yeah. So there's a lot of changes coming in this new highway code where we've got to concentrate on what they call the hierarchy ones. Tony, is that right?
So there's 3 specific rules I think we'll get into. There's a couple of other things. I mean, in reality, there's 49 rules have changed and some new amendments. We're not going to sit here and read out 49 rules of the highway code because some of them are just slightly different emphasis, slightly different wording. Obviously, professional drivers should understand the highway code, and of course, please do either online through that app or buy yourself a copy of the highway code and do update yourself. But I think we should probably just concentrate not on those 49, but just the key things. And just before we dig into it, just in case you happen to be listening to this podcast in Northern Ireland, the new highway code applies to Scotland, Wales and England only, and in Northern Ireland there's their own version of the highway code. So obviously what we're talking about here doesn't necessarily apply to you unless, of course, you happen to be driving on the mainland. So thing number 1 then, Gary, is this new concept, which is a hierarchy of road users.
Yeah, something I've not really heard of before. I think it's a good way of concentrating the mind of what we're talking about now. We're not going to just say cyclists, pedestrians. It's hierarchy. So who we're concentrating or who's got priority, what we're talking about now.
So what they've done is they've created 7 categories of road user, going from the most vulnerable and therefore the most in need of protection, through to the least vulnerable, and those have the ability to do the most harm to others. And those 7 categories, in order from vulnerable to ability to do most harm, are pedestrians, cyclists, horse riders, motorcyclists, cars and taxis, vans and minibuses, and the 7th one, as you'd expect, is heavy goods vehicles and large passenger vehicles. And what this concept is it's kind of used throughout all the other 49 rule changes. It's this concept of responsibility that's threaded through the whole of the highway code now. And what we're basically saying here is that the more more ability you have to do harm to other people, the more responsibility you need to take to protect those people all the way along that chain of that hierarchy. So in the same way that you would expect a professional large goods vehicle driver to look out for, cars, motorcyclists, whatever, in fact, all other road users, but that works its way down. So even within the highway code now, it talks about how cyclists need to protect pedestrians. And if, for example, you've got a shared pedestrian and cycleway, and we saw that in the last video that we shot, if you recall, on that Toucan crossing, what the highway code specifically now says is that cyclists must give way to the pedestrian. And you'll see that hierarchy and one type of road user looking after another all the way through the new highway code.
So when I'm out cycling, I would give priority to the pedestrian.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And you'll see that in various examples throughout the highway code. So that's the first principle. It's called Highway Code Rule H1, hierarchy of road users. So it's more of a principle that feeds everything else. So the second thing, Rule H2, is about priorities for pedestrians. And this is something where we were shooting our last video and we were talking about this on zebra crossings. At that time, at the point we shot the video, the highway code said that the motorist gives way to the pedestrian once they're on the crossing. But the highway code also says that the pedestrian shouldn't go on the crossing until the car's slowed down or stopped to give way to them, which creates an illogical impasse, doesn't it? But the highway code now is a lot clearer about that, and it says that you should give way to somebody that's looking to cross the crossing. So the other thing to do with pedestrian priority is about road junctions. Now, this is a change, very significant change to the highway code, which is, if you imagine as a car or lorry or motorcyclist or even a cyclist driving down a main road and wanting to turn into a side road. Now, if you think about the road markings there, you've got a single dotted line going into the road as a give way line going in, and a double dotted line for the person coming out. And that single dotted line, it still means give way. It means give way to other road users in that road. And the highway code always said that you should give way to pedestrians that are already in that road. Well, this is the change. The change now says that you should be giving way to that pedestrian, even if they haven't yet got into the road, but they look like they're wanting to cross. So that really just is an extra level of care that you now take as a motorist to make sure that you're not turning into that road when a pedestrian might wish to cross it.
Because I always thought, rightly or wrongly, because I done my highway code and I passed my test back in 1983, and we all forget things and everything else. When I turned left into the road, the person crossing had right of way. When I turned right, they didn't, but that wasn't the case, was it?
No, I think you invented that in your mind, Gary.
Yeah, I don't know why I had that in my mind. So that's pretty pointless, wasn't it then?
So really it was simply about, previously it was simply about, was that person in the road, or they just looked like they wanted to cross?
Yeah. So if I was turning right into the junction, if they were crossing the road, I had to let them cross. Mm-hmm. Now, if they're waiting, I should wait and let them cross before turning into the road.
Absolutely, yeah. So we talked about this before in terms of planning, and it is the case that a lot of the listeners to this podcast are drivers of bigger, heavier vehicles and have taken that extra level of training and testing. And you can't be driving a big vehicle without that forward planning and anticipation. So it is the case that if you've got somebody that looks like they're going to step into the road, you haven't got that ability to brake instantly like you would in a car. So actually, this level of anticipation and planning is something that professional drivers are probably doing anyway, and isn't a major change for them. It's just that the legal priority has changed.
Yeah, there's something named behind it now. With the hierarchy, you have to read the body language. You've got anticipation, and there's a name behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the last of these three specific rules at H3 is really about sort of formalising the way in which professional drivers protect cyclists anyway. But it is fair to say that cyclists are one of the most vulnerable road users, and particularly when they fall foul of the left turn. So this rule is all about making sure that no motorist causes a cyclist to slow down, stop, or change direction. In particular, it's that coming alongside, getting slightly ahead, and then making a left turn. So it's to protect the cyclist in that situation.
Yeah, basically, don't overtake the cyclist and then make them swerve to overtake you at a junction.
Yeah, and it has to be said that the last thing you want to be doing on a push bike is going up the inside of a vehicle, particularly a large vehicle, when there is a left turn coming up. But the onus of responsibility here, because of that hierarchy, is shifting towards the larger vehicle, the one that can do the most harm. Okay, so those are the key points. But I wrote a few other things down. I suppose the biggest change for me in all of this is this H2, this one about pedestrian priority, because I would hate to think we had a situation that after the 29th of January, a pedestrian boldly steps into the road knowing they've got priority, and there's a car driver or truck driver, van driver, whatever, motorcyclist turning into that road that hasn't yet heard these new highway code rules, and you end up having a horrible situation because of it. So I think as a pedestrian, you still need to be showing a decent level of caution, because of course you still have a responsibility to yourself, even if you are the most vulnerable in that hierarchy. So that I think is a point of concern. The other thing, couple of other things that I wanted to pull out that aren't in those specifics are safe passing distances. So they're now specified in the highway code. So this is about when passing cyclists or horse-drawn vehicles, how much gap should you leave? Now, what the highway code is now saying is that at speeds of below 30 miles an hour, you should leave a gap of 1.5 meters, and above 30 miles an hour, a gap of 2 meters. Now, I can't believe that a professional and or sensible motorist wasn't doing that anyway, but it now formalises that.
Yeah. And that's quite a gap. People don't realise you are moving from one lane into a second lane when you're overtaking a cyclist or a horse. You are literally moving into the opposite lane to overtake something.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, 2 meters is more than the width of a car, isn't it?
Yes, very much so. There's no getting away from that.
Yeah. What this rule should do is to prevent motorists squeezing through with oncoming traffic and forcing that cyclist close to the curb. And then the other thing, which I thought was quite amusing, is I've come up with a phrase over the last few days that I've never heard before. Have you heard of a Dutch reach, Gary?
No, I saw this in a demonstration either this morning or yesterday morning on the BBC News.
So a Dutch reach, for anybody that hasn't heard of this, is you see, you thought you knew how to open the door of your van or your truck or your car, but apparently you've been doing it wrong all along. And although I'm laughing about the term, the idea is actually very, very serious. So what it says, think of yourself sitting in the driver's seat on the right-hand side of your vehicle. So obviously your driver's door is on your right. What this is saying is, rather than opening the door with your right hand, just turn your body and open the door with your left hand. Now, what that does is it forces your body to turn, sort of half a rotation, if you like, which means that as you start to open the door, in fact, the sound's just dipped because I'm physically doing this and moving my head away from the microphone. But as you're doing this, it's forcing your head to look into that blind spot where perhaps you might have a cyclist coming alongside the vehicle, and you might swipe with your door as you open it.
Yeah, it's stopping you taking the cyclist out as they're coming past you instead of just opening it up. The video I actually saw, it was the rear door being opened and taking a cyclist out, and unfortunate circumstances from that side. But it was an interesting little take on how to do it, and it is a good little tip.
Yeah, I mean, you would think, and what I've always done up to now, and I'm going to try this Dutch reach, but what I've always done up to now is to use my mirror before I open the door. And I accept that probably I should have been looking at the blind spot as well. But you make an interesting point when you say the rear passenger door, because actually there is no mirror there for the rear passenger, and that would make a huge amount of sense. So those are the other things I wanted to throw into the mix without reading the full 49 changes out. But I have got some other stuff that I found.
And this is the Mythbusters we've got to touch on after watching loads of rubbish going on Facebook of all these changes that are meant to be coming in that aren't true. Oh,
well, unfortunately, Gary, what it is, there is a lot of emotion about cyclists. And, I've said this on podcasts and videos before. I've said this to you in conversation so many times. I don't think truck drivers have got a problem with cyclists in general. I don't think cyclists have got a problem with truck drivers in general. I think that truck drivers have a problem with bad cyclists. And I think cyclists have a problem with bad truck drivers. And unfortunately, there's a small amount of both that cause problems. So when you get something like changes to the highway code, which are being perceived to give cyclists loads more, power,
protection,
then there's certain newspapers that have written some quite sensational stories about this kind of stuff. And there is a bit of myth busting to do.
So we've got the new highway rule coming out where cyclists are now allowed to ride two abreast, apparently, Tony. How long has that rule been in place?
I think probably since the first version of the highway code, Gary, cyclists have always been able to ride two abreast. In fact, that highway code said that you should never ride more than two abreast, but they should ride in single file on narrow or busy roads, unless it's safer to ride two abreast. So you could be the father of a small child, and actually, to protect the child, you might choose to ride two abreast, for example.
But if we go back to the 1.5 meters, you've got to come past a cyclist quite a way to overtake them. You're in the opposite lane anyway. If they're riding two abreast, it's not an issue, is it?
Yeah, exactly. And then the other one that I've seen over the last few days is this thing that says that cyclists now don't have to use cycle lanes.
Really? Well, why not?
So basically, it does say that cyclists may choose not to. There might be certain circumstances where they may choose not to use a cycle lane, and it may be that that cycle lane is not going the way they want to go. But that's always been in the highway code. It's we if you think back to was it episode 3 or 4 when we did road signs, Gary? I can't remember. And we were talking about the different types of road signs. So you have the circular orders, you have the information signs, you have the warning signs. And a cycle lane is mandatory, and it must be used by the cyclist if it sits within, the picture of the bike sits within the blue circle. But an advisory cycle lane, which is one within the rectangle, it's a choice whether the cyclist uses it or not. And that hasn't changed, but it's been sensationalized a little bit in the press.
So, Tony, these new changes, are they all laws?
Well, it's an interesting question. So the highway code, parts of it are law and parts of it are guidance. So if you read a highway code rule that says you must do something or you must not do something, that is law, and you're committing an offence by doing or not doing that thing. Now, if you see in the highway code the word should or should not, that isn't law per se, but don't relax about it. Treat it as a must. And the reason why I say that is because if you were to go to court on a should or should not, then that would be used to determine liability. So quite frankly, it comes to the same thing. It's not, you're not committing a straightforward offence.
Yeah. So I shouldn't make a cyclist swerve.
Yeah, but if you do and you hurt the cyclist and you go to court, that would definitely be held
It'd be
against
likely you have made a cyclist swerve.
you. Yeah.
You're likely to lose.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I mean by, treat musts and shoulds as effectively the same thing.
Okay. No, that's a simple way of looking at it and understanding it.
So I suppose, really just to wrap up, I guess, what do we think of these new changes to the Highway Code?
I think they're good. I've got nothing against them. They're there to protect them. And we've championed looking after vulnerable road users. And this has just prioritised them and given a name that no one's given before.
I suppose my view, Gary, is a professional driver that gives courtesy to other road users, particularly, our drivers driving large vehicles, even vans, who are professional and thoughtful and give courtesy and protect vulnerable road users. Quite honestly, they'll be doing nothing different next week than they were doing this week. It's just that obvious need for courtesy has been formalised. For me, that sums it up. Yeah,
I agree 100% with you, Tony.
Okay.
Now, the only thing I can say, Tony, is how many people will hear about it. That's the only issue I have with the change to the Highway Code.
Well, yeah, funny enough, I did read something from the AA this morning that said that they thought that 1/3 of road users wouldn't know anything about these changes, which is a slight worry. I don't know what the cost of writing to every licence holder in the country would be. And, yes, of course, it is the case that you could have a motorist turning into a junction on Monday morning, not realising that they should have given way to the pedestrian that's just stepped out in front of them. And that's a slight worry. I dare say this will be all over the news this weekend. And, of course, the multiple millions of people that listen to our podcast will have just learnt it as well.
Well, my wife's a good example. She said, "What is the change of the Highway Code?" And I said, "Well, listen to my podcast and you'll know." I think anybody that is a driver, knows about the changes, should talk about this to their friends and colleagues, because there will be people that haven't picked up on it yet, and it's definitely worth a conversation. Yeah, I agree. Any way we can get out there and tell people through social media, podcasts, through any forum is great.
Yeah, of course. Good.
Excellent, Tony. Thank you very much for your input and knowledge as normal. And how you remember all their names, I'll never know. And your dummy arm.
So if you've enjoyed it, please do rate, review and subscribe. And we look forward to speaking to you next time. You've been listening to the Driver Hire Podcast, and thank you very much.
And as goodbye from myself, Gary Riches at the Colchester office.
And from me, Tony Goacher at the Croydon and Sutton office. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can find us at thedriverhirepodcast.co.uk.
Thank you very much for your time. Bye-bye.